everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
JJK The Culling Game, Chapter 83 to 95. Chapter 83. Domain Battle 1303. Words in the middle of the street. Kashimo looked up at the rain dripping from the sky and frowned. Why is it raining out of nowhere? What a pain. The lightning on Kashimo's body was different from Renji's situation. Renji possessed the ability to convert cursed energy into lightning, and could convert it whenever he wanted. However, Kashimo was different in that his electricity was an inherent trait of his cursed energy. He had no way to control his cursed energy so as not to carry electricity. If he fell into water, Kashimo's cursed energy would leak out uncontrollably like an electrical short circuit due to the water's conductivity. Therefore, a rainy day was not good weather for Kashimo. Even though it would not go so far as to drain all his cursed energy, as long as the rainwater touched his body, Kashimo's leak of cursed energy was bound to happen. Hearing Kashimo's complaints, Renji also shook his head. Yeah, this weather really is strange. Even though Renji's face was completely expressionless, what Kashimo didn't know was that the clouds in the sky had been summoned by Renji himself using his cursed energy. Taking advantage of the rainwater from the sky, Renji briefly washed away Kuroroshi's blood from his hand. Looking at Kuroroshi's body, which hadn't disappeared from the ground yet, Renji suddenly recalled the scene from the original timeline where Yuta killed Kuroroshi. Just thinking about Kuroroshi's appearance made Renji admire Yuta's ability to put his mouth on it. You truly are something else, Okatsu. Suddenly, Renji sensed that someone other than Ishigori was watching him. He abruptly turned his head up toward the sky, and a flash of pink hair darted across the air. After connecting the sky and the pink hair, a name instantly entered his mind. Is that Takako Yuro? What is she hiding from? Sukuna isn't even here, so why doesn't she come out and show herself? Don't tell me she's planning to ambush us while Ryu Ishigori and I are locked in battle. That is just way too despicable. Renji constantly speculated about her in his mind, completely unaware that she hid out of fear precisely because of him. In the sky, Yuro used her cursed technique to grab a piece of the sky to cover her body, and her whole self curled into a ball in fear. Unlike jujitsu sorcerers from 400 years ago, like Ryu Ishigori and Kashimo Hajime, as one of the few jujitsu sorcerers from 1,000 years ago, Yuro legitimately saw the king of curses, Ryaman Sukuna. She was someone who had actually seen Sukuna, and could truly grasp how terrifyingly powerful he was. That was an existence that ordinary jujitsu sorcerers could absolutely not challenge. After sensing the cursed energy Renji released earlier, Yuro had almost deactivated her sky manipulation out of panic. How is this person's cursed energy so similar to Sukuna's? In that single instant, Yuro recalled the suffocating dread of being dominated by Sukuna. After she saw Renji glance in her direction, she was so scared that she curled up even tighter. She didn't even dare to make eye contact with Renji for even a single second. She utilized her curse technique again to pull open a crack in space. After confirming that Renji didn't continue to look at her, Yuro said nothing more and directly ran away as fast as her legs could carry her. Yuro's flight caught the attention of Renji and Kashimo on the street. He looked up with confusion at Yuro's rapidly shrinking figure in the sky. Why is she running away? Kuroroshi is already dead, so why isn't she making a move? In the original timeline, after Yuta Okatsu killed Kuroroshi, she made a move right away. Renji saw that she fought quite enthusiastically back then. Shaking his head, he looked forward at Ishigori. Anyway, the rule to freely enter and exit hasn't been added to the colony yet. It'll be the same if I go look for her after finishing my fight with Ishigori. He stretched his body and looked with concern at Kashimo beside him. Kashimo, this rain came at a bad time. Why don't you go take cover from the rain first, and let me handle him? Don't even think about it. Kashimo objected instinctively. We agreed that I go first, don't you dare go back on your word. Fine, 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 you go first, you go first. Renji raised his hands in surrender and took 2 steps back. As Ishigori watched the two people below discuss who would deal with him first as if no one else was around, the veins on his forehead bulged. Oi, oi, oi. Aren't you two looking down on me a bit too much? He crossed his arms over his chest, and a dazzling ball of cursed energy gathered on his cannon pompadour. I am Ryu Ishigori. Before his voice could even fade, a blast of cursed energy erupted from his palm, ripping through the rain and blasting toward the two of them. An excited glint flashed through Kashimo's eyes. He stomped his right foot heavily on the ground, and his entire self turned into a flash of lightning to charge straight against the beam. Come at me. The two collided in the street. The Nioi staff and the granite blast intertwined, and each clash erupted into bursts of roars. Renji stood below, raised his head to watch the battle between the two, and couldn't help but nod. As expected of powerhouses from their era, they're fighting quite intensely. He looked up at the sky again. It looks like Kashimo isn't completely countered by the rainy day either. It's just a light rain, and it seems like it doesn't have much of an impact. The battle between Kashimo and Ishigori grew increasingly intense. The two fought from mid-air down to the ground, and from the ground up to the top of the ruined buildings. Sweet, sweet. Ishigori laughed loudly, continuously firing granite blasts from his hands. Give me more. An electricity crackled around Kashimo as he swung his staff with ferocious speed, deflecting the incoming blasts one by one. Is long-range attack all you've got? Of course not. Ishigori looked at Kashimo with an excited glint in his eyes. The continuous intense combat just now had allowed him to experience the flavor of sweetness for the first time in a long while. He could also tell that Kashimo's cursed energy seemed to be affected by the weather. As the strongest sorcerer of the Mutsu region from 400 years ago, Ishigori didn't want to take advantage of Kashimo in this kind of situation. He looked at Kashimo. You hate rainy weather, don't you? Kashimo frowned, instinctively assuming that Ishigori wanted to utilize the weather to create a combat environment that favored him. However, Ishigori didn't seem to mean that at all. If that's the case, let's create a battlefield without rain. I don't want to take unfair advantage of you. In the next instant, Ishigori forcefully raised his right hand and struck his own chest. Let me witness your strongest form. A surge of cursed energy rose from Ishigori. As a battle veteran, Kashimo immediately recognized that this was the precursor to a domain expansion. Kashimo instantly understood what Ishigori meant by his words just now. The space occupied by a domain is a specialized space that does not connect with the outside world. Therefore, even if it was pouring rain outside, as long as a domain was expanded, the inside of the domain would be completely unaffected. Wait a minute. Kashimo wanted to stop Ishigori's movements, but it was already too late. Domain expansion, dessert, hollow wicker basket. 1100 horsepower equals 1 Chapter 84, Chapter 84, Trap 1040 words inside the domain. Ishigori furrowed his brows and looked at Kashimo. Why aren't you expanding your domain? Are you looking down on me? Normally, after an enemy opened a domain, the best way to respond was to open one's own domain as well. But at this moment, Kashimo didn't choose to expand a domain. Instead, he used hollow wicker basket to counter it. Even though Kashimo hadn't introduced himself yet, based on hearing Renji call him Kashimo, and the combat Kashimo displayed, Ryu Ishigori recognized it instantly. The sorcerer fighting fiercely before him was none other than Hajime Kashimo, a legendary figure from his own era 400 years ago. It was just because the places they lived in were too far apart, and later on, Kashimo Hajime passed away due to poor health. They never had the chance to fight during their lifetimes, which always remained a regret in Ishigori's heart. After recognizing Kashimo, Ishigori was initially ecstatic. He thought that the sweet dessert of his fantasies had finally arrived. But looking at Kashimo, who stubbornly refused to open his domain, Ishigori exploded with anger. This would mean that Kashimo was confident he could defeat him without expanding his domain. Ishigori glared at him and shouted, I've long heard that you enjoy defeating your enemies when they are at their absolute best. but I didn't expect you to be this arrogant. To think you only choose hollow wicker basket to counter me inside my domain, you are really pushing things too far. Kashimo froze in place for a moment, and a moment later, he nodded without any hesitation, right. You will regret this. Renji scrutinized the black barrier, dozens of meters wide in front of him. This is the barrier after a domain expansion. To prevent enemies from escaping, a sorcerer using a domain expansion will utilize barrier techniques to cordon off a specific area, trapping both themselves and the enemy inside. In the eyes of people outside the domain appeared in the form of a black sphere. If the outer shell of the domain were destroyed at this moment, everyone inside the domain would be released. Looking at the domain, Renji fell into deep thought. Kashimo should be using the hollow wicker basket right about now, right? By the way, can the hollow wicker basket really hold up against a domain? He won't accidentally get hit by sure effect and die, right? Just as Renji was contemplating whether to directly shatter the domain from the outside, a wave of panicked cries suddenly echoed from the far end of the street. He looked up and saw several people running frantically in his direction in utter terror. Why are they running over here? Aren't they afraid of getting caught in the crossfire? He and the others had fought Kururushi and Ryu Ishigori one after another in this very spot, and the aftershocks of the battle had nearly reduced the area to rubble. Logically speaking, the weaker sorcerers and ordinary people in the vicinity should be running away. However, Renji soon found out why. In the sky, a few hundred meters away, a huge pterodactyl-like Shikigami, with a wingspan several meters long, shot a blazing stream of fire toward the sky. The flames surged forward fiercely, but halfway through its flight, it suddenly warped and altered its direction of attack. Renji's gaze sharpened. It was Takako Yuro's sky technique. She had distorted space midair, forcing the pterodactyl's flames to change course. Just as he furrowed his brow and looked at the pterodactyl Shikigami that suddenly appeared in the sky, Renji saw something. The moment he saw a distinct red trail of glowing light left behind it as it flew, he instantly recognized where the pterodactyl came from. That's Druv's independent Shikigami. Dhruv Lakdawala is one of the strongest sorcerers from the Sendai colony. In a sense, Dhruv was actually the strongest existence among them. He possessed two types of Shikigami that could act independently, a massive pterodactyl, and a giant-toothed monster standing 30 to 40 meters tall. Druv's curse technique possessed a mini-domain, and anything that passes his two Shikigami's path is attacked by the sure-hit attack it creates. An average sorcerer encountering Druv's swarm of Shikigami wouldn't even guarantee a victory. In the sky, the pterodactyl slammed violently toward a spot in the air once again. In the next instant, a pink-haired girl was knocked flying outward. She was none other than another of the strongest sorcerers from Sendai colony, Takako Yuro. Renji watched the sky, somewhat puzzled as to why Yuro and Dhruv started fighting. Yuro was sent flying backward by the pterodactyl's impact, crashing heavily into a building before finally coming to a halt. Pushing aside the rubble on her body, Yuro was just about to get up when she saw a face she absolutely didn't want to see right in front of her. You okay? Renji's voice gave Yuro quite a fright, nearly scaring her into burying herself back into the ruins. She didn't expect Renji's speed to be this fast, arrived by her side when she was completely oblivious. Yuro raised her head cautiously to look at him. After confirming that this man who possessed cursed energy on par with Sukuna's had no intention of attacking, she hurriedly scrambled to her feet and whispered. I am fine, I'm not hurt. Renji absently nodded. Why did she seem so scared? She was a hot-blooded woman, and had a serious temper when encountering Yuta in the original plot. Why does she feel like a shy schoolgirl now that it's my turn? He shook his head in his heart, and kept his doubts to himself. After all, Druv's Shikigami was still hovering in the sky. In the next instant, another stream of fire erupted as the pterodactyl in the sky spat another blast toward Renji and Yuro's direction. With a swift dodge, Renji easily dodged the attack. Yuro, who had also dodged the attack nearby, saw Renji's relaxed expression. After assuming he was unaware of Druv's existence, Yuro hurriedly shouted, "Watch out! Druv's primal Shikigami have already been released. He wants to trap all of us here to death. We have to stop him quickly. Chapter 85, Trail 1099 words. Renji finally looked off into the distance. Two massive Shikigami were flying in the air, slowly pacing in a massive circle with him at the center. A translucent red containment circle surrounded Renji, and the others a few hundred meters away, and it shrank continuously. After he finally realized he was surrounded, Renji said loudly, "That bastard Druv is way too sneaky. When did he send out his Shikigami?" What he didn't know was that the exact instant he killed Kururushi, the massive spike of cursed energy was detected directly by Druv, who camped far away inside the sports stadium. Through the cursed energy bleeding out of the battlefield, Druv immediately realized this was the perfect opportunity to wipe out the top sorcerers within the Sendai colony in one fell swoop. To avoid detection, Druv didn't order his Shikigami to launch a direct assault on Renji and the others. Instead, Druv had his Shikigami circle around them from several hundred meters away. Just a few minutes ago, the trajectories of the Shikigamis finally met, and an inviolable domain that encircled Renji and the others was officially complete. Looking at the flood of people sprinting from the end of the street, Renji finally understood why they were all rushing toward them. They were all driven over here by Druv's Shikigami. While Renji was lost in thought, the pterodactyls in the sky locked onto him once again. The pterodactyls screeched in his direction, and another barrage of roaring flames came raining down. "I said, can't you let me think for a moment? It's really annoying that you keep spitting fire over and over again." Renji raised his head irritably, glaring at the pterodactyls in the sky with dissatisfaction. He vanished from the spot with a quick flash, and then lightly snapped his fingers. The next moment, a thick bolt of lightning ripped through the dark storm clouds. The lightning struck a pterodactyl dead on, causing it to screech in agony before plummeting straight out of the sky. Inside a residential building where he was taking cover, Druv's body shuddered. He felt clearly that one of his large pterodactyl Shikigami was obliterated. Then, Druv began to actively control the large Shikigami to move back, making them focus primarily on shrinking the circle. As long as the range of his mini-domain expanded, Renji and the others would have less and less room to move. In the end, no matter how powerful the sorcerers on that street were, the winner would definitely be him. Yuro looked at Renji with a calm expression. Given Renji's cursed energy that rivaled Sukuna's, it was normal for him to defeat the pterodactyl, and there was no need to feel surprised by it. Compared to Renji, Yuro was far more interested in another part of the battlefield. Glancing at Ishigori's expanded domain, she asked him cautiously, "Aren't you going to help your companion?" "What did you say?" Renji blinked, turning to look at her. Yuro pointed her finger toward the black barrier of Ishigori's domain. "Isn't your companion trapped inside Ryu Ishigori's domain? Aren't you going to give him a hand? He's supposed to be your comrade, right?" As Yuro spoke, she carefully watched Renji's facial expressions. She didn't know what kind of person Renji truly was. She needed to observe whether he was cold-blooded and ruthless like Sukuna, and whether he utterly disregarded human life. Looking at Ishigori's domain, Renji also fell into deep thought. "What you're saying makes sense. Kashimo is technically my companion, but he insisted on fighting alone, and it wouldn't be right for me to just barge in. I have some faith in him. He was once hailed as the strongest sorcerer of his era, after all. He won't get taken down by Ishigori that easily." After pondering for a moment, Renji temporarily brushed aside the idea of helping Kashimo. The fact that he hadn't lost yet meant Ishigori's domain didn't hold an overwhelming advantage. Since Kashimo could go through his whole life without a single defeat, it proved at least that he himself had experience dealing with domains. He withdrew his gaze and spoke with a serious expression. "Besides, we've got something way more important to deal with right now. An even more important thing." Yuro was taken aback. The next second, she followed Renji's gaze and looked out toward Druv's distant mini-domain. Renji's voice sounded again. "We need to dismantle Druv's mini-domain as fast as possible, otherwise a ton of innocent bystanders are going to get dragged into this. Hearing those words, a flash of disbelief crossed Yuro's eyes. In her understanding, a figure and top sorcerers of the world were either a bit better, like Ryu Ishigori, or worse, like Sukuna. Aside from themselves and those closely related to them, they never treated ordinary people as human beings. While Yuro was lost in thought, Renji ran the distance in a few breaths, leaping right up to the edge of the mini-domain. As she watched Renji's departing figure, Yuro found herself following right behind him for some reason. After arriving at the edge of the mini-domain that glowed with a red light, Renji looked at the trail in front of him and fell into deep thought. As the Shikigami moved constantly, several of Druv's large-scale Shikigami were elsewhere and had not returned yet. Meanwhile, the smaller cursed spirits were under Druv's control and chose not to attack Renji. Their current objective was simply to keep narrowing the size of the mini-domain. Yuro explained to him. This is that inviolable barrier formed by Druv's curse technique, and anything inside that is hit by a sure hit. Renji nodded, reaching his hand out as if he intended to touch the trail left by Shikigami. Yuro hastily warned him, "You can't make direct contact with the trail. Otherwise, even if you have a lot of cursed energy, you'll still be slashed by the red light of the mini-domain. There's no need to worry." He calmly grabbed the trail, and his fingers that extended into the red light were cut instantly. He hurriedly withdrew his hand, and used RCT to restore his fingers. Is Druv's mini-domain really that powerful? I actually couldn't withstand it even when I used my cursed energy to reinforce it. He really lived up to his reputation, having once single-handedly conquered the Japanese archipelago. Yuro's originally anxious heart settled down instantly after Renji was injured. She had genuinely thought Renji possessed some kind of special technique to bypass the sure hit of Druv's domain. Chapter 86, Battle of Wits. 12:21 words. Looking at the red mini-domain barrier in front of him, Renji fell into deep thought. There was a distinct difference between the adaptation of his skill, adaptive evolution, and Maharaga's adaptation ability. Maharaga's adaptation occurred directly on its body after the wheel on its head finished turning, allowing it to directly adapt to the opponent's attack. For example, if the enemy used a fire attack, Maharaga would become completely immune to fire damage after adapting. Renji's adaptation, however, manifested in discovering the enemy's weaknesses and formulating countermeasures accordingly. In other words, when facing a fire attack, the adaptive solution provided to him wouldn't grant direct immunity to fire damage. Instead, it was more likely to allow him to grant him the capability to create something like a curse energy reinforcement to resist the fire damage. The moment Renji's finger was injured by the trail, Renji felt his brain spinning at high speed. And information about Druv was constantly being dug up from his brain. First of all, Druv's inviolable domain deals extremely high damage, and ordinary methods probably can't block it at all. Secondly, this domain must apply to Druv himself as well. Otherwise, he could just hide inside the domain to avoid the sure hit effect instead of hiding inside the stadium, as he did in the original timeline. Through simple analysis, Renji immediately reached a conclusion: to defeat Druv, he had to bypass the mini-domain and directly attack his main body. He began to think once again. Druv's Shikigami included the giant-toothed beasts and the pterosaurs. The giant-toothed beasts were fewer in number but massive in size. They would crawl slowly on the ground in a circle, eventually forming a mini-domain wall dozens of meters high. It was impossible to bypass the domain, and flying through the sky was the only option. However, Druv's Shikigami weren't limited to the giant-toothed beasts, and there were also a large number of pterodactyls causing interference in the sky. The pterodactyls were small, but they were numerous and highly agile. Just like Takako Yuro, the moment she tried to fly over, she was intercepted by the pterodactyl. The more Renji analyzed, the more alarmed he became. Druv truly lived up to his reputation as a jujitsu sorcerer capable of single-handedly subjugating an entire archipelago. Druv's curse technique was incredibly powerful. As long as he stayed in the small circle at the very center of the barrier, he would be virtually invincible. However, a new question immediately arose in Rinji's heart. How on earth did Yuta Okatsu bypass the inviolable domain and directly kill Dhruv inside the stadium? It shouldn't be possible for him to get inside with both the ground and the sky locked down, right? Rinji's brain whirled furiously as he rapidly contemplated the way Yuta used to bypass Dhruv's inviolable domain. After his gaze swept across the nearby street, an idea suddenly flashed in his mind. The sewers. What did you say? Yuro froze for a moment, looking at him, who had suddenly spoken aloud. I said the sewers. Rinji looked at Yuro excitedly. Dhruv's two types of Shikigami only move on the ground and in the sky, but beneath the ground, there are no movement trajectories from his Shikigami. Yuro instinctively looked down at her own feet subconsciously. After she found that her vision was slightly obstructed, she turned her head immediately to look toward the side. As a reincarnated sorcerer who received a flesh body, she possessed all the memories of this body. She knew perfectly well that beneath the modern city of Sendai lay a complex sewer system. Through the manholes of the sewer system, one could reach almost any part of the city. If Yuta had realized this as well, it would have completely explained how he bypassed the domain and directly reached Dhruv's side. It was highly possible that he made his way through by crawling through the sewers. Judging by Dhruv's physical appearance, the vessel Kenjaku had found for him was also very likely an old man. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense for Kashimo and Ryu Ishigori to appear young while only Dhruv remained an old man. Dhruv very likely suffered from his lack of understanding of modern technology, and there was simply no such advanced sewer system in his era. Rinji looked at Yuro with excitement. Yuro, can you pinpoint Dhruv's location from the sky? Of course I can. Yuro nodded happily. Even though she would suffer attacks from Dhruv's pterodactyls if she went up to the sky, Yuro could still resist a bit if it was just for a moment. As long as she found Dhruv's location from the sky, Rinji would definitely be able to reach the location where Dhruv was through the sewers and defeat him. After a few moments, Yuro immediately pulled the surface of space to elevate herself. As she reached the air, she quickly scanned the surroundings. There were many buildings around, and it was difficult for her to judge where Dhruv might be hiding based on the buildings alone. However, when she spotted a certain villa, Yuro instantly concluded that it was Dhruv's location because he saw a lot of trails looming over the sky. This was obviously a trajectory that Dhruv had his Shikigami leave behind ahead of time to prevent himself from being ambushed. Over there. There's a lot of trail underneath the villa, about 600 meters to the southwest. That's highly likely where Dhruv is. Yuro excitedly provided Dhruv's location to him, but what he did next made her jaw drop. He didn't crawl down into the sewers to head over as she had expected, but slowly raised his arm and extended his index finger toward Dhruv's direction. In the next instant, Yuro realized what he wanted to do. She saw the cursed energy in Rinji's body begin to gather toward his index finger, and a large amount of cursed energy condensed at his fingertip. If Sukuna, whom he challenged last time, was present, he would instantly recognize that this was precisely the kind of sonic cannon Rinji shot at him in the middle of the battle. Even though his sonic cannon couldn't compare to Ishigori's granite blast at all in terms of output efficiency and speed, it was perfect for striking a completely fixed target. After a few moments, the sonic cannon at Rinji's fingertip blasted out with a roar. The surging lightning directly shattered all the buildings along its path. Hiding inside the villa, Dhruv vaguely sensed something a split second before the attack struck. The expression on his face changed drastically, and he summoned the last remaining Shikigami by his side immediately to shield the front of his body. However, against Rinji's rampaging sonic cannon, the shielding Shikigami couldn't even hold out for a second before being pierced through and killed instantly. Without pausing for a moment, the sonic cannon continued its trajectory toward Dhruv's body. Faced with an attack capable of piercing through Sukuna, it took only a single instant. Dhruv Lakdawala, a sorcerer who had once dominated an entire era, was defeated. Back on the street, Rinji flipped his hair and sighed under Yuro's bewildered gaze. What a delightfully hearty battle of wits, Dhruv. I probably won't forget you for the rest of my life. Chapter 87, Nijirundeo 1237 words. Takako desperately wanted to ask this exact question. You spent all that time using your intelligence to analyze the situation, and the conclusion you came up with was just to solve it with power. Does any of this actually make sense? Looking at the group of buildings in front of her that had been utterly obliterated by Renji's attack, Yuro chose to play along. That was truly a peak battle of wits right there. It had me breaking out in a cold sweat. As for Yuro's doubts, Renji actually had a perfectly reasonable explanation. He didn't have much of a choice either. The system's condition for acquiring a curse technique required him to fight jujitsu sorcerers, and the more difficult the battle, the higher the probability of obtaining the technique. To ensure he secured a technique, when this challenge concluded, Renji had to suppress his own power and engage different sorcerers in battles that were as hardy and fierce as possible. As Aizen once said, it's difficult to step on ants without crushing them. If I am intentionally holding back my strength just to fight you, doesn't that make it incredibly difficult? Since it's that difficult, how could it not count as a hardy, hard-fought battle? Just as Renji's hard-fought battle came to an end, the fight between Ishigori and Kashimo down the street was also reaching its end. The sound of an eggshell cracking reached Renji's ears as spiderweb cracks began spreading across the outer shell of Ishigori's domain. The next moment, Ishigori's domain shattered completely. After the collapse of the domain, Ishigori and Kashimo tumbled out onto the street. Currently, Ishigori looked in much better shape than Kashimo, with just a few blunt bruises on his body. Kashimo, however, was in much worse shape. His entire body was covered in burns from Ishigori's granite blast, and his remaining cursed energy was nearly depleted. It was very clear that Kashimo fell into a disadvantage during his clash with Ishigori. Even so, Renji cast an admiring glance toward Kashimo. For Kashimo to fight to this extent against Ishigori's domain expansion without a domain of his own is also extremely impressive. Ishigori looked at Kashimo with a solemn expression. He never expected that Kashimo truly wouldn't use a domain expansion to counter him right until the very end. Did he see through the fact that my curse technique is pure cursed energy output, so I wouldn't fall into a technique burnout due to the shattering of my domain? Is that why he deliberately chose not to expand his domain? Ishigori couldn't quite see through Kashimo, but that didn't stop him from respecting the Mun. Even though Ishigori's domain only possesses a guaranteed hit effect, the fact that Kashimo managed to break the domain entirely using nothing but hollow wicker basket was not something an ordinary person could achieve. Kashimo Hajime, you have my respect. To think you refused to use domain expansion until the very end, you really are something else. Kashimo's expression remained perfectly casual. He cleared his throat lightly and praised Ishigori back. You're pretty amazing yourself. Out of all the people I've met, there are very few people stronger than you. I'm willing to call you the second strongest. To the side, Ishigori, who originally prepared to take advantage of the moment Kashimo thought his cursed energy depleted to secretly charge his granite blast for a surprise attack, suddenly stopped. What do you mean I'm the second strongest? Does that mean there's someone even stronger than me? Ishigori glared at him angrily and shouted. Hey. I can't just act like I didn't hear those words. Who is this strongest person you've ever seen? I want to fight him one-on-one. Kashimo blinked, and just as he was about to turn his head to look behind him, a familiar voice drifted over. Yar, Kashimo, you look a bit horrible right now. Renji, who suddenly joined the battlefield, shattered the existing standoff. Ishigori followed the voice to look at Renji. After recalling that boundless cursed energy on Renji's body before the domain expansion, the arrogance that just flared up inside him was instantly suppressed. Ishigori's gaze swept back and forth between Kashimo and Renji. Through the change in Kashimo's expression, Ishigori realized instantly that the strongest person in Kashimo's mouth was very likely him. Kashimo was also looking at Renji, but his eyes quickly drifted past him to land on Yuro standing right behind. Based on Yuro's cursed energy signature and her distinct hair color, Kashimo vaguely deduced her identity. He wasn't surprised that Renji could defeat Yuro. What shocked him was how Renji had managed to convince Yuro to follow him around in such a short amount of time. Kashimo wasn't the only one who recognized her, Ishigori recognized her as well. As early as the first day in the Sendai colony, Ishigori had crossed paths with Yuro a few times. Even though their fight had been interrupted by Kuroroshi's interference, Ishigori was certain that Yuro was a stronger sorcerer on par with himself. Looking at the three individuals standing opposite him, who clearly seemed to be a team, Ishigori's heart sank slightly. This 1 versus 3 is probably a bit too much to handle. Isn't this a bit too sweet? Just as Ishigori pondered his next move in his mind, Renji raised his head and looked at him. Oi, Ishigori. Ishigori's body tensed up slightly, and alarm bells rang loudly in his heart. Just as he considered whether he should strike first to gain the upper hand, Renji spoke. You want to fight strong opponents, right? I happen to have an incredibly powerful opponent lined up. You'll definitely like him. Ishigori looked at him with a puzzled expression. He's finding a stronger opponent for me. Does this mean he doesn't want to continue fighting with me? Yuro also looked at Reggie with a sudden realization. Previously, she had been incredibly confused by Renji's actions. He wasn't after points, nor did he seem driven by a pure thirst for battle like Ishigori. What on earth was he putting all this effort into coming here for? However, those doubts vanished the moment Renji tried to recruit Ishigori. This was his goal all along. However, a new doubt appeared at the bottom of Yuro's heart. Given Renji's strength, what kind of opponent would actually require him to come out and look for help? Just how ridiculously strong was this opponent? Ishigori, too, couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity about the opponent he mentioned. Who is this opponent you're talking about? Renji smiled faintly. The King of Curses, Ryaman Sukuna. As the words fell, the air froze instantly. Ryu Ishigori's pupils contracted suddenly. That King of Curses, Ryaman Sukuna. Unlike Ishigori's slightly thrilled expression, Yuro's face turned pale the second she heard the name Sukuna. A memory began to viciously attack her mind as the terrifying nightmares from 1,000 years ago resurfaced. She looked at Renji in absolute disbelief and shrieked, "You're going to fight Sukuna?" "Yeah, didn't I mention that to you?" Renji nodded casually. Yuro barely went through any thought before her body reacted ahead of her brain. She turned around abruptly and ran in the opposite direction without any hesitation. "Then you go ahead and fight him. I won't get in your way. I'm leaving, bye." Chapter 88, Malfunction 12:08 words in the end, Yuro Takako didn't leave after all. It wasn't because she changed her mind, but rather because the culling game hadn't added the rule allowing free entry and exit through the colonies yet. The Sendai colony was so big. Even if she wanted to leave, Yuro had nowhere to go, and she figured she might as well temporarily stay by their side. After successively dealing with Kuroroshi and Druve, the players inside the Sendai colony, who loved targeting ordinary people, were basically gone. By the time they finished relocating the ordinary people, who had been caught up in Druve's cursed technique, to a safe place, night had already fallen. At a temporary shelter, Renji looked down at Yuro from a higher vantage point. "Yuro, do you really not plan on joining us to fight Sukuna? If you guys want to fight Sukuna to the death, you can just go ahead and do it. It won't make any difference anyway even if I join, and besides..." Yuro sighed, looking up helplessly at Renji, Kashimo, and Ishigori standing before her. "What is up with you guys posing like that? Why are you standing in those positions?" They were currently standing under the moonlight in a strange posture. They had struck a striking resemblance to the Awaken, My Master's pillar men pose from JoJo, standing together atop a large boulder as they stared down at her. Ishigori, standing on the right, shook his head. "I don't know either. Apparently, it's some kind of pose from JoJo. Renji said that if we posed like this, maybe you'd change your mind upon seeing it. What kind of logic is that? Don't you think it looks incredibly weird?" Yuro yelled, completely losing her composure. Renji, who was standing in the middle with his hands on his hips, lowered his arms in confusion and said in all seriousness. Is it weird? But I honestly think it looks good. Good my ass. Seeing that he couldn't change Yuro's mind, Renji could only sigh helplessly. Alright, if you don't want to go, then forget it. Ishigori jumped down from the boulder and walked over to Renji. Forget about Sukuna for a moment, Renji. Didn't you say you needed my help with something? Renji slapped his own forehead and quickly said, right. I still don't know how to use domain expansion, so I wanted to ask you guys to expand a domain on me. I want to experience up close what a domain actually feels like. Yuro looked at him in shock. You don't know how to use domain expansion? Renji scratched his head awkwardly. Yeah, I really don't. I've been wanting to learn it, but I just haven't figured it out yet. To the side, Ishigori also sized up him with a strange expression. On the way over, he already heard from Yuro about how Renji had instantly killed Druve in a single move. He never expected that a jujitsu sorcerer with this level of cursed energy wouldn't even know domain expansion. Ishigori nodded with great enthusiasm. No problem. It's just a domain expansion. Once I recover a bit, I'll just show it to you. Right at that moment, Ishigori suddenly noticed Kashimo sitting off to the side. He looked at Renji with curiosity, pointed at Kashimo, and said, Hey Renji, since you want to experience domain expansion, why don't you look to Kashimo Hajime? Renji followed his gaze to Kashimo and spoke subconsciously. Ah, Kashimo. How is he supposed to show me? This guy doesn't even know how to expa. Wait a minute. Before Renji could finish his sentence, Kashimo cut him off with a loud shout. He looked at Kashimo in confusion. What's wrong, Kashimo? Is there a problem? Hajime Kashimo paused for a moment, his gaze quickly sweeping over Ryu Ishigori. I just wanted to say that Ishigori already expanded his domain once today, and his cursed energy hasn't fully recovered yet. If he opens it again, the effect won't be that great. You should pick someone else. Afterward, Kashimo pointed at Yuro next to them. Why not let Yuro Takako do it? She looks like she's in great shape. Yuro, who was called out suddenly, raised her head in utter confusion. How did I get dragged into this? She initially wanted to refuse, but looking at Renji, her interest was suddenly piqued. She was very curious about how a powerful sorcerer like Renji, who possessed cursed energy on par with Sukuna, would manage against her domain. Sure, it's not like I have anything else to do. I don't mind showing it to you. Renji's eyes lit up but then quickly dimmed again. He looked at Yuro hesitantly, opened his mouth, but ultimately turned his gaze back to Ishigori. How about, we wait for Ishigori Ryu to recover tomorrow? I can just experience the domain expansion tomorrow. I'm not in a rush. Yuro furrowed her brows slightly. Why did this guy's attitude suddenly turn so strange? He was so enthusiastic just a moment ago, and now he's saying he wants to wait for Ishigori. Why wait for him? Yuro's tone carried a hint of displeasure. Do you think my domain is inferior to Ishigori Ryu's? Hearing this, Ishigori happily adjusted his pompadour hairstyle. It looks like mine is the strongest after all. Renji is even willing to wait for me just to experience a domain expansion. No. Renji waved his hands frantically. Yuro, your domain is super strong too. It's just... He hesitated, his eyes scanning Yuro's body before quickly looking away. It's just what? Yuro glared at him, her tone growing increasingly aggressive. He hesitated for a long while before finally speaking up very cautiously. I was just thinking, if a domain shatters, the sorcerer falls into a state of curse technique burnout, right? Yuro nodded. Of course. That's a fundamental rule of domain expansion. Is there a problem with that? Renji's eyes drifted toward Yuro's chest. If your technique burns out later, the technique covering your body will vanish too, right? Yuro froze and looked down at her own breast subconsciously. To the side, Kashimo and Ishigori also followed Rinji's gaze and looked over. The air suddenly fell silent. Kashimo's expression became highly subtle. He looked at Yuro's chest subconsciously, and then turned his head away quickly, pretending to look at the stars in the sky. Ishigori, on the other hand, took a look quite openly and then nodded thoughtfully. Yuro's face turned from pale to red, and from red to blue. "You bastard, are you implying you can just shatter my domain whenever you want?" Yuro's voice was terrifyingly low. Her cursed energy began to surge violently, and the surrounding air currents formed a terrifying vortex centered around her. Rinji took a step back, frantically waving his hands. "Yuro, calm down. I didn't mean it like that. Save your breath. Let's settle this." Yuro roared, her eyes practically spitting fire. "Didn't you want to witness a domain expansion?" A flash of madness crossed her eyes as she crossed her fists in front of her chest. "Then I'll let you witness it to your heart's content." Domain Expansion, Cloth of the Sky, Chapter 89. Chapter 89, Enlightenment. 1245 words. In an instant, a massive spherical domain appeared on the spot. Since Yuro only pulled Rinji into her domain, Kashimo and Ishigori were pushed out by the domain's outer shell. Inside the domain, Rinji felt that the pressure on him was a bit overwhelming. Even though it wasn't his first time entering a domain, the suffocating sensation hit him hard all over again the moment he found himself inside a domain once more. Yuro stood at the exact center of the domain, her long pink hair floating high up in the air. "How good is your reverse curse technique?" "It's all right," Rinji boasted reflexively, "as long as I don't split in half, I should be able to heal back from anything." Yuro nodded with relief. "In that case, I can rest easy." As Yuro spoke, she raised her hand toward him and suddenly clenched it into a fist. Thin icebreaker. The next moment, from an angle where Rinji completely failed to react, a blast of thin icebreaker struck directly from his left side. Rinji let out a howl, and his entire body was blasted flying straight out. "Yuro, why didn't you even say start? At least give me some time to prepare." Yuro didn't reply. Instead, she gritted her teeth as she looked at him, who was practically unscathed. As a sorcerer from 1,000 years ago, Yuro's domain featured a sure hit effect but lacked a sure kill effect. Normally, Yuro's thin icebreaker required her to manually grab the surface of space to throw it. But within her domain, she could unleash it freely from any angle, and at any target without needing manual manipulation. Under these conditions, Yuro could easily hit any target within the domain. The only flaw was that if the enemy's defense was too tough, just like Rinji's, even though they would be knocked away, they wouldn't sustain any actual significant damage. "Why should I say start? Don't you know the reverse curse technique?" Yuro said coldly, and a flicker of gravity passed through her eyes. Rinji climbed back up and patted the dust off his body. "Even if I know the reverse curse technique, it doesn't stop the pain." The moment the words fell, Rinji's figure vanished from the spot instantly. Yuro's heart tightened, and the space around her body rapidly distorted. This was the second effect of her domain. Yuro didn't need to manually grab the surface of space here, and could distort the space around her body at will, causing any incoming attacks aimed at her to miss entirely. Rinji's attack took a sharp turn right around Yuro's body and bypassed her. The characteristics of the domain allowed Yuro to instantly perceive Rinji's position. Without even turning her head, Yuro unleashed 2 consecutive thin icebreakers behind her. Thanks to the domain's sure hit effect, Yuro's thin icebreaker struck high once again and blasted him away. Before Rinji's body could even hit the ground, a new barrage of attacks rained down. Yuro gritted her teeth and unleashed thin icebreaker continuously. The strikes within the domain poured down upon Rinji like a rainstorm, and every single shot locked onto his position with accuracy. Rinji's body was thrown back and forth across the domain like a punching bag, and the cursed energy on his body began to fluctuate rhythmically. He was beginning to adapt. Inside the domain, Rinji began to think, or rather, his brain was operating at an unprecedented speed. The concepts he could never figure out before were suddenly becoming clear one by one at this moment under the pressure of Euro's domain. It was an incredible feeling. It was like someone who had lived in total darkness suddenly seeing the light. Renji could feel his mind expanding frantically, and the knowledge that was originally blocked was being cleared out one by one. The realization that thrilled him the most was his understanding of the hollow wicker basket. This anti-domain technique, which he previously couldn't comprehend no matter what, suddenly began to emerge clearly under the continuous bombardment of Euro's thin icebreaker. Isn't the essence of hollow wicker basket just to construct a mini-barrier with my own cursed energy? Even though it isn't a true domain, the principle is the same. I just need to create a space of my own around my body. Inside this space, the sure hit effect of the enemy's domain will be neutralized. That's how it is. Renji's eyes grew brighter and brighter. He felt like he was about to grasp the very core of the anti-domain technique. After another thin icebreaker came howling toward him, Renji didn't dodge this time. He raised both hands, clenched his hands into fists, and the cursed energy inside his body began to circulate according to the form he had just learned. Hollow wicker basket. A barrier of cursed energy expanded in front of Renji, forming a translucent, basket-like structure. In the next instant, the thin icebreaker that was about to strike Renji lost its lock on target, and turned right past his side. Euro's eyes widened in disbelief. Didn't you say you didn't know how to use the hollow wicker basket? With the protection of the hollow wicker basket, the sure hit effect of Euro's domain was neutralized. Of course, this didn't mean Euro's thin icebreaker could no longer hit him at all. It just meant that while the thin icebreaker was previously automatic, and could hit Renji without any manipulation from her, she would have to manually aim and manipulate them to hit him from here on out. On the other hand, Renji lowered his hands and looked at the hollow wicker basket in front of him in a daze. I learned it. I fucking finally learned it. Throughout heaven and earth, I alone finally mastered an anti-domain technique. It's all thanks to you, Euro. Euro froze, completely unable to understand what he meant. Renji looked at her with joy and said it with excitement. After being with you, my brain became active, and things I couldn't understand before directly became clear. Let's keep going, Euro. I'm leaving my future in your hands. After he finished speaking, Renji opened both arms toward Euro, signaling her to continue her attacks. He wanted to take advantage of today to master all the cores of the domain in one fell swoop. Euro, however, was staring back at him in utter panic and confusion. What on earth are you talking about? After she finished speaking, she turned around to leave, prepared to deactivate the domain immediately. However, Euro suddenly remembered something and paused in her tracks. She turned her head back, glared at Renji warily for a brief moment, and quickly strode right up to him. She forcefully ripped off his jacket, put it over herself, and only then deactivated the domain. Kashimo and Ishigori, who were sitting cross-legged on the ground waiting for the sparring match to end, suddenly saw Euro's domain dissolve. It ended that fast. Ishigori looked toward the vanishing barrier in confusion. After the barrier dissipated, he saw Euro wearing Renji's original coat over her body, running quickly into the distance with a flushed face. Meanwhile, Renji was left standing alone on the spot, looking completely dumbfounded. Ryu Ishigori and Hajime Kashimo exchanged a blank look. What just happened? How did you fight to the point where someone's clothes ended up missing? Chapter 90, Adapt. 1260 words November 3, 2018, early morning, Sendai. Since Ishigori hadn't fully recovered his cursed energy yesterday, and it was already getting late, Renji decided to just rest for the night. After all, he had already learned Hollow Wicker Basket. He could just wait until the next day to seek out Ishigori and learn the more advanced technique of domain expansion. When the sun rose again, Euro, who had been gone all night, finally returned. Looking at her expression, it was as if she had completely forgotten about everything that happened yesterday. After she returned, Euro didn't mention a single word about it either, and she just sat in the corner without a word. Renji sized her up from top to bottom and spoke out of curiosity. Hey, Yuro, how come you're wearing clothes? Yuro had somehow managed to get a set of clothes from somewhere. She was no longer using her curse technique to distort the space in front of her to protect her privacy like before. Yuro glared at him but didn't answer his question. Renji scratched his head in bewilderment, and he muttered a few complaints before asking again. Yuro, then where's my coat? After a few moments, Yuro finally spoke and spat out 2 words without turning her head. You lost it. Renji immediately panicked upon hearing this. How could you just lose it? Yuro took a deep breath and turned to stare at him. After being stared down, Renji turned his head away awkwardly and waved his hand. Fine, fine. I'll forgive you this time. Just make sure you fix your behavior next time. Seeing that the conversation between the two had ended, Ishigori stood up enthusiastically from the side. He looked at Renji and said, Forget about your clothes. My cursed energy is fully recovered, I can expand my domain again. Yesterday, due to his physical condition, Ishigori had given up the chance to spar with Renji to Yuro. Now that Ishigori's condition has recovered, it was time to quickly make up for the battle they missed yesterday. Let's fight again. Renji's eyes lit up as he looked at him with excitement. Ishigori grinned widely and nodded vigorously. Domain expansion, dessert. Dom hollow wicker basket. In the next instant, a massive surge of cursed energy erupted from Ishigori's body, forming a gigantic spherical space around them, trapping both himself and Renji inside. Inside the domain, a barrage of fireworks shot up from the ground, and a firework similar to a summer festival appeared in the sky of the domain. How is it? Ishigori asked proudly. My domain is pretty good, right? It really is. Renji agreed, nodding, it's lively. I didn't expect you to have such a flashy inner world, Ishigori. The fireworks inside Ishigori's domain were just like the shrine inside Sukuna's domain, with both being additional decorations manifested within the domain. The decorations inside a domain are deeply tied to a sorcerer's soul, and can reflect a person's hobbies to a certain extent. Since Ishigori's domain was this lively, it meant that he genuinely enjoyed these kinds of scenes. Ryu laughed out loud. Well, of course. After he finished laughing, he reached up with both hands to touch his pompadour hair, and a massive amount of cursed energy began to condense at the tip. Are you ready? Renji took a defensive stance. Come at me. After a few moments, a granite blast that condensed a terrifying amount of cursed energy came whistling toward Renji. Unlike Yuro's domain, where attacks could come from all directions, Ishigori's granite blast looked pretty much the same as before at first glance. However, his domain wasn't just for show. Renji clearly leaped to the side to dodge the blast, but the fired projectile pulled a complete 180-degree turn in midair and slammed directly into his back. Oh, it can turn like that? Renji tumbled through the air a few times, looking at him with shock. Isn't the turning angle of your cannon a bit too ridiculous? Ishigori adjusted his hairstyle and explained the effect of his domain with a smile. Inside my domain, I can freely redirect the output of my cursed energy. It's only because you activated Hollow Wicker Basket and neutralized my sure hit effect. Otherwise, I wouldn't even need to manipulate it manually, and it would track you automatically on its own. The moment the words fell, Ishigori unleashed another blast from his hair toward Renji. As he had willingly explained his technique, Ishigori had triggered the revealing one's hand binding vow, and the speed and power of his granite blast increased significantly once again. Renji didn't have time to think. The cursed energy inside him surged frantically, forming a thick layer of armor on the surface of his body. Who even asked you? Why the hell are you saying that out of nowhere? Amidst the continuous explosions, Renji's body was forced further and further back across the domain. Since he was inside a domain, even if Renji wanted to dodge, it was incredibly difficult. The granite blast under Ishigori's control was simply too flexible. However, this was exactly what Renji wanted. He wanted to force the activation of his skill, adaptive evolution, under the pressure of a domain, and maybe awaken a domain expansion of his own. At this moment, Ishigori laughed out loud. It's not over yet. The blasts no longer came one by one this time. A continuous stream of cursed energy blasts erupted from Ishigori's head, raining down toward Renji like a blanket covering the sky. Even though Hollow Wicker Basket could neutralize sure-hit effects, Ishigori's attacks inside his domain didn't even need a sure-hit function. Under his guidance, it was almost impossible for Renji to dodge. The effect brought by Hollow Wicker Basket was clearly unable to resolve Renji's current predicament anymore. He needed a newer method to deal with Ishigori's rapid fire. Renji roared in his mind, "Adaptive evolution, show me your limit. Adapt for me." Taking a deep breath, Renji completely dropped the defense of Hollow Wicker Basket. Those faint understandings he caught faintly inside Euro's domain began to appear once again at this moment. In this split second, Renji's brain was operating at an unprecedented speed with one thought after another flashing through his mind. What is a domain? It is an innate domain imbued with a cursed technique, constructed by a sorcerer using a massive amount of cursed energy to manifest the surrounding environment. To activate it, it required sufficient cursed energy, an extremely high mastery of barrier techniques, and a sufficiently high degree of understanding and mastery of one's own curse technique. Among these conditions, Renji definitely had no problem with sufficient cursed energy, and he felt that his understanding and mastery of his own curse technique were about there as well. The only flaw was probably that his understanding of barrier techniques was still not enough. He had not come into contact with barrier techniques up until now, and he didn't even know how to open a curtain. Renji didn't have any knowledge regarding barrier techniques in his mind at all. Normally, it should be impossible for him to expand a domain expansion because he couldn't construct the boundaries of a domain at all. Even if his brain worked at maximum capacity right now, Renji couldn't just manifest a whole system of barrier techniques out of thin air. However, was that really the case? Renji's pupils shrank suddenly as an epiphany struck his mind. Who said a domain has to have a boundary? Chapter 91, Non-1263 words. For over 1,000 years in the jujitsu world, almost all jujitsu sorcerers have structured their domains under the prerequisite of using barrier techniques to close off a boundary. To a sorcerer, a domain with a boundary is like a miniature world, making it much easier to imbue it with the sure-hit effect of their cursed technique. Modern sorcerers, however, like to stack a sure-kill effect on top of that sure-hit foundation. This has caused the difficulty of constructing a domain to skyrocket, leading to fewer and fewer sorcerers who are capable of performing a domain expansion. This is exactly why domain expansion went from being a relatively common technique in the past to a rare, supreme pinnacle of jujitsu mastery possessed by only a handful of modern geniuses. Domains that do not require a powerful guaranteed hit offensive technique are generally easier to construct, which is why older, rule-based domains were more common than the highly lethal modern domain expansions. There was someone who did the same. It is none other than the prodigy sorcerer whose talent is said to rival Satoru Gojo, Kinji Hikari. Hikari's domain, Idle Death Gamble, is built directly into his cursed technique. It featured neither a sure hit nor a sure kill, and it only had a sure hit that targeted himself. It was purely a lottery domain, where all resulting effects target Hikari himself. The only reason why jujitsu sorcerers needed to compete fiercely over domains was that the sure-hit effect of a domain provides an overwhelming advantage in combat. To counter this effect, a sorcerer facing an enemy's domain must expand their own domain in response, using their own sure-hit effect to neutralize the enemy's. However, this is not the only way to handle it. If a sorcerer is powerful enough, they can completely overpower and defeat the enemy while withstanding the sure-hit effect directly. Therefore, in a sense, Renji didn't necessarily need to construct a domain with a sure-hit effect. He only needed to construct a domain that could make him invincible. Ishigori's granite blast came roaring in. Though he didn't let his guard down, Renji didn't dodge either. Renji's mind immersed itself in his own world completely, and everything in the outside world no longer had anything to do with him. The cursed energy inside his body began to circulate in an unprecedented way. This is... Ishigori's pupils contracted slightly. He clearly perceived that Renji in front of him was beginning to change, and some kind of change seemed to have occurred in his body. In the next instant, Ishigori's granite blast struck him dead on. Holy shit! Ishigori cried out in alarm, and jumped up in sheer terror. It wasn't because his granite blast had been ineffective, but it was because it worked too well. Renji's body had completely dissolved into a current of electricity and vanished under the blast, leaving nothing but his clothes drifting down to the ground. Meanwhile, Yuro and Kashimo suddenly noticed that Ishigori's domain had dissolved. Kashimo Hajime let out a puzzled sound. How did it end so fast? It's barely been any time. Yuro also found it strange. The two looked up toward where the domain had been, but what they saw next left them even more bewildered. After the domain vanished, the only figure that appeared was Ishigori, while Renji completely vanished from the spot. Yuro looked at him in confusion. Why are you the only one here? Where is Renji? Ishigori licked his lips in panic and spoke with a stutter. I think I killed Renji. That's impossible. Yuro countered instinctively, I don't believe a powerful sorcerer like him could die. Kashimo also looked at him with a mocking grin. You think you could kill him? Though Kashimo hated to admit it, Renji was indeed the strongest jujitsu sorcerer he had ever met. But when Ishigori pointed to the remnants of Renji's clothes scattered on the ground, the two finally began to doubt themselves. This can't be. Yuro walked briskly over to the pile of clothes. She dropped to her knees, inspecting them closely. There wasn't a single trace of blood on the fabric, only a hole left behind by the impact of Ishigori's last granite blast. He really turned into a current of electricity and vanished after getting hit by my cannon. Ishigori scrambled to explain, I saw it with my own eyes. A whole person just went pop and dispersed into lightning. Kashimo frowned as he looked at the clothes on the ground and spoke suddenly, Ishigori, think back carefully. Was there anything abnormal about him right before he was hit? Ishigori strained his memory. His cursed energy fluctuations suddenly became very strange. It felt like he was about to expand a domain, but it was different. The surrounding environment didn't change at all, and it was more like his own body was undergoing a transformation. His body transformed. Kashimo repeated under his breath, and his expression turned deadly serious, his eyes narrowing as if he were sensing something. Suddenly, a faint electrical current drifted through the air. That sensation was growing sharper and clearer by the second. Stop arguing. Kashimo suddenly barked. He stared at the clothes on the ground, his gaze locked tightly onto that pile of seemingly ordinary fabric. The concentration of cursed energy in the air was skyrocketing. Just at this moment, a loud rumble came from the sky suddenly. The three of them snapped their heads up. The originally clear sky turned incredibly dark and overcast in an instant, and the continuous rumble of thunder began to echo from within the storm clouds. Is this a weather change triggered by cursed energy? Ishigori looked up at the sky in disbelief. He could feel that every single bolt of lightning brewing in those clouds carried a terrifying surge of cursed energy. The next moment, the first bolt of lightning struck down. The lightning hit Renji's clothes with accuracy, the blinding white light forcing the three of them to shield their eyes instinctively. Then came the second bolt, the third. The lightning poured down from the sky like a rainstorm, and every single bolt struck the exact same position. Then, Renji's clothes began to glow. Yuro cried out. They saw a tiny streak of lightning flash out suddenly among those clothes scattered on the ground. That lightning leaped between the clothes, and the lightning grew more and more numerous and dense, began to attract and fuse with each other. A ball of lightning slowly formed right above the clothes. The sphere radiated a blinding white light, and the cursed energy swirling inside it was so intense that the three of them involuntarily took a few steps back. What on earth is? Ishigori's eyes widened. The clothes began to float. It was just as if an invisible hand held them up, and piece by piece, they rose into the air slowly. Moreover, the sphere of lightning began to reshape itself. It was no longer a simple ball, and it expanded outward, gradually tracing an outline. It was the silhouette of a human. A blurry figure was rapidly taking shape amidst the flashing electricity. After the final bolt of lightning merged into the figure's chest, everything fell dead silent. Ha 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 ha. A familiar laughter echoed from the air. Renji floated suspended in midair, fully dressed in his original clothes, with faint currents of electricity dancing around his body. He threw his head back and roared with laughter, opening his arms wide toward the sky. I have finally mastered the core of cursed energy. Chapter 92, Epiphany 1178 words. Renji slammed his fist shut. A thick bolt of lightning shot down from the sky, striking him directly. However, not only did he not receive any injuries, but the aura on his body rose continuously instead. This is... Ishigori stared blankly at him in midair. He could feel that the current Renji was completely different from before. If he were a powerful sorcerer with an immense amount of cursed energy, Renji had somewhat transcended the boundaries of humanity. Hey. What exactly happened to you? Kashimo looked up at him and shouted at the top of his lungs. As a fellow wielder of an electricity trait cursed energy, he desperately wanted to know what was going on with Renji's body right now. Yuro didn't say a word, and just stared blankly at him in the air. The aura radiating from Renji felt intimately familiar to her. She felt this kind of feeling 1,000 years ago from Sukuna. That was a kind of helplessness after a mortal saw a god, and right now, facing Renji, she felt that exact same way. Renji slowly descended to the ground, and the electrical sparks around his body gradually receded. After a few moments, he looked at the three people in front of him and grinned. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to make you guys worry. I just had a sudden epiphany and couldn't quite control it. Who was worried about you? Yuro retorted reflexively, but her eyes couldn't help but scan him up and down. What exactly happened to you? Ishigori also stepped forward and asked out of curiosity. What was the deal with you just now? After my blast hit you, how did you just... Renji blinked and a spark of electricity flashed through his eyes. Well, about that. He raised his right hand, palm upward. The next moment, his palm vanished directly into thin air and turned into a ball of electrical current that scattered in all directions. Holy shit! The three of them instinctively leapt backward to avoid being struck by the sudden current. Kashimo stared at Renji's severed wrist in utter disbelief. He saw that at the part where the palm vanished, what was exposed was not blood, but a plasma composed of blue electrical currents instead. The next instant, a palm grew back out from the plasma, and his hand restored to its original state once again. What on earth are you right now? Are you still human? Kashimo Hajime looked at him in terror. Of course I'm human. Renji replied in annoyance, this is just the effect of my domain. Whose domain has an effect like that? Faced with their unanimous rebuttal, Renji explained with a straight face, you can't really say that. Actually, there are examples. Kinji Hikari's domain, for instance, was one that only applied an individual buff to himself. Renji's own domain followed a similar logic. Renji's had no barrier, no sure kill factor, and no sure hit factor. His domain simply enhanced the strongest part of his cursed technique. The strongest aspect of his technique was, naturally, his curse technique release. Renji's technique release was originally supposed to alter his physical body, turning him into an elemental life form composed of lightning. This process used to be uncontrollable, and he could only turn into a massive beast incapable of controlling its own leaking, cursed energy. But amidst the attack of Ishigori's domain, Renji had grasped the core of cursed energy. After he expanded his domain, Renji's body would automatically possess the effect of elemental transformation, and any sure hit attack from an enemy's domain would automatically trigger his phenomena state upon impact to evade the damage. As he listened to Renji's explanation, Kashimo held it in for a long time before he squeezed out a sentence. That's not very jujitsu, is it? Not jujitsu. It seems pretty jujitsu to me. Renji spread his hands as if it were normal in the world. After Hikari Kinji expands his domain, doesn't he get the automatic RCT too? It seems pretty reasonable for my domain to grant automatic elementalization, right? Yuro was the first to snap out of her shock and stare at him for a good while. Does this mean you know how to use domain expansion now? I guess you could say that. Renji looked down at his hands, though mine is probably a bit different from yours. The three of them fell silent. After a long silence, they finally accepted the reality of Renji's domain effect. Kashimo was the first to give up on talking to this monster. Let's drop it for now. It's dinner time, let's go grab some food first. Renji nodded and followed right behind him. But after they walked for over 100 meters, Kashimo suddenly realized something was off. He turned his head around to look at Renji. Aren't you going to deactivate your domain? Why should I? He looked back at Kashimo naturally. It doesn't require me to do anything while it's active, so it's fine to just keep it open. Wait a minute. Ishigori looked at him, utterly bewildered. Does your domain not have a range restriction? A domain isn't supposed to move with the sorcerer at its center, and it requires the sorcerer to fix it to a specific location. However, Renji had walked 100 meters without showing any signs of his domain closing. Renji scratched his head. He suddenly realized that his domain didn't seem to have a fixed range. After expanding his domain, it took effect directly, and there was no range restriction or anything. Renji said tentatively. Maybe it's because my domain is an open barrier type, so it doesn't have a range. The three of them gasped in unison. Yuro thought of something and asked eagerly, then doesn't that mean you can carry your domain effects with you and walk all over the world? Renji nodded with some uncertainty. Kashimo followed up and asked. What about the cursed energy consumption? The consumption? Renji closed his eyes and carefully sensed the flow of cursed energy inside his body. A moment later, he opened his eyes, and his expression became a bit strange. It feels like basically zero consumption. The three of them cried out in unison. Kashimo frowned deeply. Impossible. How can a domain expansion have zero consumption? Even if yours is an open-type domain, maintaining the output of a cursed technique requires cursed energy. But there really isn't much consumption. Renji also scratched his head with some confusion. The flow of cursed energy in my body has barely changed. It's like... He paused, trying to find the right words. It's like this state has already become an instinct of my body. It isn't that I am maintaining the domain, but rather that the domain itself is simply there, and it doesn't require me to do anything. Yeah, that's not a domain. You just discovered an anti-domain technique based on your cursed energy, and adapted to my sure-hit attack. Suddenly, Ishigori interrupted him. Chapter 93, Coping 1099 words. Then, Yuro looked at Renji. Turn off this domain of yours. Renji scratched his head. Why should I turn it off? It doesn't consume anything, isn't it great to keep it active? However, Yuro seemed to want to see if his domain expansion was normal, and just stared at him. He shook his head with a smile and sighed. Sigh, all right. Afterward, Renji deactivated his domain. There were no changes that occurred around them, nor was there any special ripple. He simply reverted to his previous body, made entirely of ordinary flesh and blood. The next moment, Yuro stared at him and spoke again. Now expand your domain back on. You are so troublesome. Why are you making me open and close it? Renji frowned impatiently, but his body still obediently opened up his domain once more. Looking at Renji, whose aura hadn't changed at all, Yuro verified, Did you open it? Yes, I did. Renji subconsciously shouted while raising his hand to perform his elementalization trick again. Unfortunately, Renji's performance didn't draw any gasps of awe from everyone. The three of them locked their gazes onto Renji. Their eyes held a mix of helplessness, desperation not to laugh out loud, and pure resignation. Feeling a bit creeped out by their gazes, Renji couldn't take it anymore and yelled, "What's wrong with you guys? Say something." After a brief pause, Yuro opened her mouth. "Do you truly believe you've learned domain expansion?" "I think I've learned it," Renji answered instinctively. Yuro didn't answer directly this time. Instead, she looked at his newly restored palm. "Is this your domain expansion? Is it really?" He replied again with a firm tone, looking down at his elementalized body. "It can neutralize an enemy's sure hit effect, so how does it not count as a domain expansion?" However, Yuro looked at him and spoke with a firm tone. "This is fundamentally not a domain expansion at all." Hearing these words, Renji's expression suddenly darkened. "You're saying this isn't a domain expansion?" Yuro firmly replied, "It's not." The atmosphere instantly turned dead silent, like the calm before a storm. The next second, Kashimo jumped up on the spot and screamed. "I knew it wasn't either. This isn't a fucking domain expansion at all." He looked down at his elementalized palm. "Why the hell did you just hand me a domain like this? That's not how jujitsu works. You're supposed to channel your cursed energy first, maybe throw in some incantations, and then clash domains with me on some rooftop. Finally, amidst my passionate response, you strike a small hand sign. I'm supposed to make a cool little hand sign, agree to clash domains with you, and show you my domain. How did it just activate automatically like this? It's not jujitsu at all. I don't accept this." After watching Renji suddenly throw a massive tantrum on the spot, the three of them sighed helplessly. Why did Yuro and Ishigori say this wasn't Renji's domain expansion? The reason was simple: whose domain closes without causing a curse technique burnout? What he was using right now wasn't a domain expansion at all. He was only doing what the effect of his cursed energy, and just adapted to the domain clash earlier. A domain didn't even exist in the slightest. Seeing this scene, Kashimo, who was standing to the side, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. After suppressing his laugh, he stepped forward, patted Renji on the shoulder, and comforted him. "I know you're eager, but don't be eager just yet. A domain really isn't all that important. There have been many powerful jujitsu sorcerers in history who couldn't use domains, but that didn't stop them from becoming powerful sorcerers, right?" After a few moments, Renji looked at him with a strange expression. "Kashimo, you're not talking about yourself, right?" The smile on Kashimo's face instantly froze. Ishigori, who had been listening from the side, changed expression. He recalled his sparring match with Kashimo yesterday, where he refused to expand a domain expansion no matter what. Ishigori found it hard to accept that Kashimo, who was hailed as the strongest from 400 years ago, couldn't use a domain expansion. He looked at Kashimo in disbelief. "Wait a minute. Hajime Kashimo, you don't know domain expansion." Kashimo choked on his words for a long moment, completely at a loss for how to answer. "I never said I could, did I? You clearly implied before that you could." Kashimo's face flushed red, the veins on his forehead bulging as he argued back. "A bluff in battle can't be considered lying." He followed that up with even more nonsense, like sorcerers are supposed to know how to lie, which made Ishigori burst out laughing. The air was instantly filled with joy. After a brief period of coping, Renji finally faced the harsh reality that he hadn't learned domain expansion. He turned to Ishigori angrily and said with a look of disgust, "Ishigori, it's all your fault. The pressure from your domain was way too weak. It didn't even force me to go all out, which is why I couldn't grasp domain expansion at all." Ishigori, who was still laughing a moment ago, was now the one frozen on the spot. Renji also had grievances he couldn't say. How many opponents had I gone through one by one? Did any of them actually have the real strength? They were all just speed bumps for Sukuna. Renji had every right to complain. He used to fight Sukuna, and now the others could really unlock Renji's true potential. They just didn't have the capability. After a few moments, Renji turned his head to look at Kashimo, who was trying to hold back his laughter. Kashimo, you're not much better either. You were the very first sorcerer to prepare for the fight against Sukuna. You haven't even mastered the basic fundamentals of being a sorcerer. How can you guarantee me a win when we actually face Sukuna? We should be realistic here. First, let's master our own domain expansions and the core of Jujutsu. The air seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Even though Kashimo and Ishigori were incredibly annoyed, they couldn't find a single logical point to fire back with. Combined with Renji's strength, they could only helplessly listen to his scolding. Meanwhile, Yuro looked up at Kashimo and Ishigori, then looked at Renji. She quietly took a step back and used the two men as a shield in front of her to avoid being scolded. Chapter 94. Chapter 94. Cautious 1071 words. In the end, Renji temporarily gave up on trying to expand a domain expansion. Instead of wasting my energy to teach myself, I should just wait until I meet Sukuna later, and let my brain adapt on its own. What if my brain actually manages to find a way for me? Moreover, Renji's trip to Sendai wasn't entirely fruitless. He successfully mastered the core of cursed energy and gained an anti-domain technique that could neutralize the sure effect. Even though his human form couldn't unleash a devastatingly powerful sonic cannon like his cursed technique release, an elementized body allowed him to do many things he couldn't do before. The most obvious change was that he could now achieve temporary flight in midair by turning his entire body into electricity. As he continued to test his new abilities in the Sendai colony, Renji had no idea that his appearance had already caught the attention of others. As the creator of the Culling Game, Kenjaku didn't have direct control over the barriers, but he could perceive some changes in the colonies to a certain extent. Since the day before yesterday, he noticed a very strange thing. The Tokyo No. 2 colony suddenly became very quiet the day before yesterday. This happened right after a massive amount of cursed energy appeared there at the very beginning. The cursed energy inside the barrier hasn't harvested the massive cursed energy thrown around during fights for the merger. This was highly unnatural. Kenjaku clearly remembered that he placed Kashimo Hajime into the Tokyo No. Kashimo was a battle maniac, and how could no battles be happening with him around? Furthermore, the exact same situation was happening in the Sendai colony. Aside from a massive spike of cursed energy yesterday at noon, and the deaths of two powerful sorcerers, he didn't really feel frequent battles in Sendai after that. Yuram, who stood beside Kenjaku, noticed his strange expression. What happened? It's nothing much, but it seems that some very interesting things happened inside the barriers. A very powerful sorcerer appears to have emerged. Very powerful. Yuram sneered, completely dismissing Kenjaku's words. The word powerful was a title only Sukuna deserved, and any so-called powerful was merely a mortal who happened to be born in an era without Sukuna. Kenjaku, however, looked at Yuram with a knowing smile. That might not be true. Did you forget about Gojo Satoru? Hearing the name, Gojo Satoru, a trace of solemnity flashed across Yuram's face. Even though he hated to admit it, Yuram knew that Gojo Satoru was in existence who could rival Sukuna. Of course, Yuram would never actually admit this out loud and let out a cold snort. Setting aside whether Gojo Satoru actually possesses that kind of strength, he's currently trapped inside the prison realm and can't get out. Since he stayed in contact with Kenjaku, Yuram knew that the inverted spear of heaven and the black rope, which could release Gojo Satoru's seal, were all gone now. Even if the people of the Jujutsu world wanted to unseal Gojo Satoru, they couldn't do it. However, Kenjaku suddenly raised his head. Oh my, I just suddenly remembered that I also made a vow with the angel, and she has been reincarnated as a player in the Culling Game. If Jujutsu High finds out about her existence, they might actually be able to bring Gojo Satoru back. You bastard. Yuram glared at Kenjaku in anger. Seeing that Yuram was genuinely angry, Kenjaku smiled and raised his hands reassuringly. Don't worry, the prison realm is still with me. Even if Jujutsu High managed to contact Angel, they wouldn't be able to unseal Satoru Gojo. I won't allow him to ruin my plans. Currently, Kenjaku hadn't taken control of Tengen yet, and he had no idea that the prison realm in his possession was actually the front gate. He didn't even know that Tengen possessed another object called the prison realm, back gate. In his view, Gojo Satoru's seal was already settled. November 3, 2018, afternoon, Sendai. Renji spent the entire afternoon testing his new body, and nothing special happened. The only minor incident was that the offspring produced through parthenogenesis by Kururushi, whom Renji had killed yesterday, had awakened once again. Since he had already defeated Kururushi before, Renji left this resurrected Kururushi for Kashimo to deal with. As night fell, Renji sat on a rock, completely lost in thought. Yuro looked at the gloomy Renji and asked in confusion, "What are you doing?" "I'm thinking about our next plan." "The plan?" Yuro looked at him, puzzled. "Did you not already map out the following plan?" "What else is there to think about?" Since the plan had already been explained to Kashimo and Angel, Renji didn't mind repeating it to a couple more people. Thus, Ishiguri and Yuro also knew about his plan to fight Sukuna at this moment. Renji nodded awkwardly. A small problem appeared. After setting up the plan earlier, he had forgotten a very crucial piece of information. The prison realm in Tengen's hands was the back gate. Even if they lifted Gojo Satoru's seal through the back gate, Gojo Satoru would still emerge from the prison realm, front gate. But the problem was, the front of the prison realm was currently in Kenjaku's hands. Gojo Satoru would be exposed directly under Kenjaku's nose after being unsealed. If things went wrong, Yuji might find out about Gojo Satoru's return. If they failed to contact Gojo Satoru before that happened, they wouldn't be able to hide in the dark with Gojo Satoru for an ambush. Moreover, Renji wasn't sure if he could keep Gojo lying in ambush because he found it difficult to convince him of that plan. After he explained all of this, Renji leaned back in frustration. "What should we do, Yuro? Do we have to go hunt down Kenjaku first?" Yuro fell silent for a moment before asking back in confusion. "Is there a problem with doing that? What if we don't win? Won't our plan be totally exposed then?" Hearing Renji's response, Yuro thought she had misheard. "Do you mean to say that you are worried you cannot defeat Kenjaku?" She looked at the cursed energy on Renji's body, which was on par with Sukuna's, took a deep breath, and finally squeezed out a sentence. "Have you always been this ridiculously cautious?" Chapter 95, Bitter Farewell. 1244 words. Cautious. Renji asked back in confusion. He always felt that his plan was not perfect enough, and that a problem might appear somewhere. Just like during his last challenge, Renji briefly let his guard down, which caused the angel to accidentally die. If Yurom hadn't failed to give the fingers on his body to Sukuna right away, their final showdown against Sukuna might have been a total failure. This time, I must eliminate all risks. I will crush every single factor that could cause the fight against Sukuna to fail. Afterwards, Renji spoke with a worried look on his face. Who knows what kind of trump cards Kenjaku might have up his sleeve? We're in deep trouble if a problem suddenly appeared. A thought flashed through Yuro's mind subconsciously. Where exactly is the danger? The one who should be terrified right now is Kenjaku. Yuro stared at him. Seeing that he wasn't being sarcastic, she took a sharp breath inward. Then keep thinking by yourself. I've got no ideas for you. Afterward, Yuro turned around and walked away, leaving only her back to him. Seeing this, Renji leaned back and lay down on the rock again, his mind racing with anxious thoughts. What on earth am I supposed to do? November 5, 2018, early morning, Sendai. After a whole day of thinking, Renji still failed to come up with the optimal plan to avoid the risks. According to the available information, the best solution was, of course, to find Kenjaku directly, eliminate him, and grab the prison realm front at the same time. This way, not only would Satoru Gojo's return remain hidden, but the instigator would also be dealt with. However, the problem was that he didn't know where Kenjaku was right now. The only time and date he knew Kenjaku might appear was around November 14th, when Kenjaku and Yurom went to the massacred Zenin clan estate to prepare for the bath. I couldn't just lie in ambush for Kenjaku at the gates of the Zenin estate, right? The Zenin clan hadn't even been wiped out yet, and showing up directly at their doorstep might be a bit too arrogant. Kashima walked over, holding a mango that Renji had deliberately found for him. You still thinking about your stupid plan? What do you mean by a stupid plan? Renji sat up and glared at him. What does a reckless brute like you know? Kashimo didn't get angry and just shrugged. If you ask me, all this back and forth thinking is completely the mindset of a loser. I say we just go look for Kenjaku and be done with it. If you win, you take the stuff. If you lose, you die. Renji rolled his eyes. You go play somewhere else. Leave the plan to me. Kashimo shook his head helplessly, seemingly disappointed by Renji's cowardice. Do whatever you want with the plan, but I have to inform you that it is time for us to leave the barrier. Renji looked up at the sky. When they first entered the barrier, they had agreed with Angel to come out 3 days later. This was clearly the day. Forget it. Renji stood up. It is useless to think so much. We should probably leave the barrier and look around outside first. What if we just happen to bump into Kenjaku as soon as we step out? The edge of the Sendai colony. This was the place where Renji entered the barrier. As the time reached the agreed moment, a ripple suddenly appeared on the originally sealed barrier. The next moment, an opening suddenly tore open in the barrier, and on the other side of the opening stood Angel Kurusu Hana, who had been waiting outside for them for 3 days. Seeing Renji and Kashimo reappear, Hana let out a massive sigh of relief. You guys made it out. She looked at the people behind him. Aside from Kashimo, who was there from the start, there were 2 people whom she had never met before. After stepping out of the barrier, Renji pointed to Ishigori and Yuro behind him, introducing them to Hana. This is Ishigori Ryu from 400 years ago, and this is Yuro Takako from 1000 years ago. Hana examined Ishigori and Yuro with great interest. While Hana examined them, Ishigori and Yuro also looked at her. As a fellow sorcerer from 1000 years ago, Yuro knew about the existence of the angel. Then, she stepped forward and greeted Hana warmly. I didn't expect you to be resurrected too, Angel. What a coincidence. Suddenly, a mouth materialized on Hana's face. Angel spoke to Yuro Takako in a cold tone. Don't lump me in with the likes of you. Hana and I are in a partnership. It is entirely different from your situation. The incarnation and resurrection of Yuro Takako and the others directly erased the souls of the original owners, which, in a sense, counted as murder. Angel, on the other hand, had reached a mutual agreement with Hana, coexisting in a specific symbiotic relationship. She thoroughly despised reincarnations like Yuro's, as it violated her core principle that the dead should move on to the afterlife. Hearing this, Yuro glared at Angel in anger. You bastard. The angel's disdain for them almost overflowed from her words. Yuro heard long ago that the angel was a righteous person who hated ancient sorcerers like them who resurrected through incarnation. She just hadn't expected Angel to be so blunt about it without even being willing to hide it. Yuro knew that if Angel weren't so focused on purifying Sukuna, she probably would have unleashed Jacob's ladder to erase them right then and there. Seeing the tension rise, Renji quickly rushed between the two to play peacemaker. Whoa, let's all calm down. We're all comrades here. What's with the fighting? As he spoke, Renji turned his head to look at Yuro. Yuro, we've left the barrier now. You should go live your own life. Yuro, who was still fuming, froze on the spot. What did you just say? Renji scratched his head, looking at her with confusion. Did you not want to avoid the fight against Sukuna, and just live your own new life instead? Now that you're out of the barrier, go find a place to live the life you want. There's no need to keep following us. The air fell silent for a moment. A look of confusion appeared on Yuro's face, but then it quickly flushed bright red with anger. She glared furiously at him and screamed, "You think I actually want to help you? Even if you begged me on your knees, I wouldn't follow you." After she said this, she turned around in a huff, jumped straight into the air, used her sky manipulation curse technique, and flew away. She left only Renji scratching his head on the spot, completely baffled. What's wrong with her? Did I say something wrong? Ishigori walked over and patted him on the shoulder. Hana Kurusu shook her head, and let out a deep sigh. Renji stood there and looked at the last remaining person, Kashimo. "Kashimo, what do you think happened to her?" Kashimo shook his head and guessed. "Maybe it's that time of the month." Renji nodded in agreement. "I feel like that's highly possible. They really are such a hassle." Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.